Good evening and welcome to the Upset Podcast. We're happy that you tuned in. Tonight, we're talking about the Gaza conflict. Coming up next. Hey, once again, welcome back. We're so happy that you tuned in this evening, and we're also happy that we have these wonderful people with us. Hey, guys.
Well, howdy do.
Good evening.
Good evening. Welcome. How's everybody? Everybody had a great week?
Yes. I tell you, the weekend Sabbath was just great.
Let's see, were you in Huntsville at that time, or were you still in PA?
I was midway there. I tell you, it's almost like I'm looking forward to it again right now. But it was
yeah. And just yesterday was somebody's birthday, December 7th. Who? I wonder who had a birthday.
Well, Pat looks like the guilty party. Is it Pat?
Oh no, I'm a summer baby.
Was it Miggs?
No.
First.
Was it Chuck?
Process of elimination. Was I?
Yes. Happy birthday.
Thank you.
Happy birthday.
I didn't know that your birthday was near Christmas.
Yeah, December baby.
Well, that's a nice way to think about it. But I say it's always on Pearl Harbor Day.
Oh my goodness!
Wow.
Isn't that a nice thing to remember?
Right? Yeah.
At least the day that the United States was attacked by the Japanese. So
let me be tally real quick. At least this day was the bomb.
No.
It was the bomb when he was born.
Very well done.
Thank you, Tally. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
But things that your mom wasn't thinking about Pearl Harbor on that day. She
was that's right. Baby boy.
I wouldn't be here if I was actually born in the year of.
This is true. But this week a lot was kind of going on, particularly one of the tragedies we learned about this week was what happened in California at the Feather River Adventist School there, with a shooter coming and actually injuring two students, 5 and 6 year olds. I mean, the ages just made my heart just, whoo. I mean, I am glad that, as is what we know, they're in critical condition, meaning that they're being, treated. But it's just such a sad situation that I think kind of shook our community specifically.
I wanted to touch, how did he get in? Because most of our schools are, have locked entrances.
Well, he got in because he made an appointment. He posed as
right. He was supposed to be there getting a child coming to the school. Yes.
Yeah. And that's the thing, because that makes us think, obviously any of our schools, which are usually rather small, always looking for new people. If someone reaches out to the school, obviously they're going to make provisions for them to come. So it's kind of sad that.
I would think that this would give us an opportunity to revisit our security.
Absolutely, we have to.
I believe Superintendent Alberti requested a shutdown. Mm-hmm. Of our schools here in Allegheny East, but it's not a matter of just shutting down. We need to seriously review our security protocols, because we get real loose. We take a lot of things for granted, and we get presumptuous. The Lord's going to watch over our school. Well, I'm sure that the Lord is watching over the school that was assaulted. So,
I
mean, it's just thinking.
We need to learn from this.
And it is about having security. I think some of our people just resist We don't need cops walking around the school.
Mm-hmm.
Well, tell you what, if you live in an urban area, as you well know, that CEO of that health
United Healthcare
organization was shot down right on the street.
Terrible.
Walked out, pulled out a gun.
Yeah.
Waited for him, Chuck. Waited
that
for
is
him.
the world we live in.
Right. Yeah,
the world we live in. Yeah.
That was kind of sad. I was thinking about that situation too. The CEO, Brian Thompson, I believe was his name. And the interesting part about it, I think it happened at like 6:45 in the morning. He was on his way to like this investors conference, and he's just walking by himself, and the guy is able to shoot him. And it raised a lot of questions about security, even for CEOs of, companies like that, which are often in the news for, people do not like health insurance companies because of the claims that they're denying. They're losing loved ones because of what the insurance. So I think even that industry is now thinking about how do we need to beef up our security for our CEOs and those who lead those types of companies.
And the shooter even had written on each bullet.
Right. Defend. What is that? Deny, defend, oppose, or something.
Oppose. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Which, so very calculated.
Listen, but let me go back to the other one. I sit on the board for
G.
Peters, and the way that the principal moved so quickly to make sure all the parents, everyone knew how to hold it down. We just living in a society, you said it, Chuck, where we can't take for granted, Tally, when we were coming through, when we had a tent effort.
Yeah.
They gave us the Bible and said, if you're a tent master, the way you keep everyone from stealing the organ and the chairs was by praying.
Yeah, I've been a tent master twice.
Yeah, when I joined the church, Chuck, you tent master there, weren't you?
Yeah.
At 11th and Diamond Street, one of the worst neighborhoods in the city. And Charles had a baseball bat. I think he thought
I did. That was given to me to say, well, this is for your protection. Yeah, right. Okay. Yeah. I can't bat a bullet away. So
we slept on the rostrum. We slept on
it.
Yeah, me
I
too.
did. Yeah. Wow. Were you there? No, you
when they crucified my Lord. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I was young and brave and felt like, hey, I could do this.
Yeah. Brave.
It all wasn't the same. It just wasn't the same either.
Yeah. Times are changing.
Well, I mean, see, our society is so angry right now, just high anger about everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it just.
When it's all said and done, though, what we have to recognize is that crime is actually down, but our ability to report on it is up, and the tools that criminals use are more virulent and more lethal. So
that's true.
We feel less safe than we've ever felt before. But the truth of the matter is that human beings have always been vulnerable, and until sin and Satan are vanquished,
here it comes.
It will be with us.
It is the risk that we.
Yeah.
Thanks for that.
So yeah,
we have to be very careful in this season because crooks are escalating their efforts and their attempts. I know
that is true.
One very well who just had some service people come in their home, and while they stepped away for a minute, the people robbed them, their wallet, and went as soon as they left, went shopping. So we have to be so careful. I was like, how can you be so bold? I saw your face, right? In my home, right? You really think you're not going to get caught, right? And you represent somebody. I mean, you came to my house as a legitimate service, so someone has your name, but people don't care.
Yeah, there's also
we should watch and pray.
Yeah,
that's true. And I know even during the season too, with a lot of packages being delivered, you got to watch out for those people they'll come right off your porch. Come on your porch, take your stuff and keep going. And some people don't even know to report that. A lot of it's being caught on Ring cameras and other things, and reports are being filed. So just be diligent. Okay, guys. Well, it's time for us to now transition into our topic of the evening. And one that's, I mean, I hate to refer to it as heavy, but it's very detailed topic. It's one to me that I consider a little bit more complex than what a lot of people may understand. And so we thought it was only appropriate to have our in-house scholar,
Charles,
educate us a little bit.
Did you say scholar or clown? What? No, not the scholar.
In this case, clown is I.
Yeah. So here in the Upset, we like to cover those topics that are happening in our world and that are upsetting people, upsetting situations. And so this is definitely one of those. So Tally, take it away.
Well, brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls and children of all assorted ages, we turn our attention today to a very complex situation in the most disputed territory on the face of the planet Earth. During this season, when most of the world turns its attention to a land that is known as the place where the Prince of Peace was born, we recognize that this land is also a place of continual, ongoing conflict. And what land am I speaking of? Well, let's center in on it now. I mean, when you look at how big and how vast the world is, I mean, over on the left side of the screen, you see the portions of the United States, and right in the heart of it, there's the landmass of Africa. But as we zoom in, we find ourselves looking at a little sliver of land, just a little place of land that's called the Near East or the Middle East. There's the Nile River right in the middle. And as we go closer, we're looking at the Sinai Peninsula of Egypt. And right there in the heart of all that we are staring at is a place that is known as the land of Israel. That's what we call it now. But historically, over the last 1,000+ years, it's been called Palestine. That piece of land that you're looking at, that little sliver of land, is the most disputed territory on the face of the earth. And we draw our attention now to an even smaller portion of that. And that little teeny weeny piece right in the heart of your picture is called the Gaza Strip, where 2.5 million people eke out a miserable existence on a regular day. But now it's even not a regular day, and they are dying by the thousands. Let's zoom in a little bit on this land of Israel that is called Palestine. What makes it such a hotly disputed territory? Well, one of the first things about it is because it is a bridge between the three most populous continents on the planet, Africa, and then Asia, and then Europe. People have always been traveling through this area. It's a corridor for civilization. So people have always been going back and forth through this piece of territory. And of course, it is the territory that is centered in all of our Bible stories. When we read about Palestine in the Bible in the Old Testament, initially it is populated by people that we commonly call Canaanites. And the place that we call Jerusalem, it was the home of a group of people who were called the Jebusites. And there are all sorts of tites, who are running around in the Bible, the Canaanites, the Jebusites, the Hittites, and the other tites. There are all sorts of tites running around in there. But we came to know this area of Palestine back from our Bible days. Now, the Israelites who came into this land were Johnny-come-latelys, to be honest with you about it. They entered the land of Palestine. And this, folks, I want to say this to you right now. We are skimming the surface, and we're doing it in a very fast way. So please don't think that this is thorough, and forgive me for anything that you think that I have left out. But the Israelites came into the land in about 1400 BCE. That was after they left Egypt during the Exodus, and they came into the land and discomforted some of the Canaanites and took over the city later on known as Jebus, where the Jebusites lived. The Greeks initially called this land Philistia, and it was named after a group of people that we become very familiar with, the Philistines. Palestine, Philistine. You get it? You hear it there?
Yep.
The Greeks called it Philistia. And then the Romans, in a fit of anger because the Jewish people were always resisting their overlordship, in the 2nd century, The Romans kicked all of the Jews out of that area and renamed it Syria Palestina, and forbade Jews to live in Jerusalem, even though some of them crept back in. But that's just a brief history of that little sliver of land. Now let's put it back in its proper context, where it sits right in the middle of the Middle East there, with Egypt to the south and Saudi Arabia to the southeast, Jordan to its direct east, the Mediterranean to its west, and Syria to its north, and Lebanon to its extreme north. And let's take a look at how that land has changed hands over the years, because it's going to bring us up to our present day. In the 7th century, now we all know that the Romans had it when Jesus was there, but by the 7th century, this land that's called Palestine fell into the hands of Muslim Arabic people who were followers of Muhammad. Muhammad died, and about 5 to 6 years later, his followers took over the land of Palestine from the Byzantine Empire. When you think Byzantine, think Justinian. In the year 691 CE, they built a temple, a masjid, a mosque, on top of the site that had been occupied by the sanctuary of God. The Dome of the Rock actually sits right over that piece of property, that mountain, that hilltop, where Abraham was about to kill Isaac, where Solomon built his first temple. It sits there to this day. On the Temple Mount is a Muslim mosque called the Dome of the Rock. And it was built there right around the beginning of the 8th century to demonstrate that that piece of property had been taken over by the Muslims. Well, that wasn't going to stand for long, because a bunch of Europeans came together in what was called the Crusades. And in 1100, they took Jerusalem back, specifically to say that the Holy Land shall not be in the land of hands, rather, of heathens. They took it back during the Crusades. People like Richard the Lion-Hearted, so forth and so on. These individuals came and they took the land back. So it goes from Muslims to now Christian forces. But then in 1187 CE, it is reconquered by Muslim forces, particularly by a gentleman, a Kurdish man who became the Sultan of Egypt, named Salahuddin. And if you ever want to do a fascinating study about a fascinating personality, look into the life of Salahuddin. He reconquers Jerusalem on behalf of Islamic powers. But then that changes somewhat again as the Mamelukes come in during the 13th century and take Palestine for themselves. The Mamelukes were basically a group of, well, they had been slaves, but when you think slave, don't think African slaves. These were mostly people who were Caucasian and Turkish, the Mamelukes were. And then after them, the Ottoman Empire, who basically comes from the land of Turkey, took over the land all the way into the late 16th century, all the way up basically until you get to the 20th century, when World War I occurs. And after almost, over 1,000 years, it falls into the hands of Europeans. When World War I is fought and the Ottoman Empire falls and Palestine comes under the League of Nations, and they give it to the British to manage under the British mandate after World War I. Now, so we're talking about right around 1900 there, beginning of the 20th century. And a guy by the name, and you may not have heard his name, but he is the founder or the father of modern Zionism. The Jews by that time had been out of Palestine. I mean, they were scattered abroad across the face of the earth, mostly in Europe. And they said, we need to have a homeland back. And Theodor Herzl advanced the notion of having their own homeland. They didn't know where it would be. At one point, people thought that they were going to go to Africa. They were looking at Uganda as a place to reestablish a homeland for the Jews. But finally, they said, no, we need to go back to our original homeland. And there was all sorts of squabbling going on about whether or not the Jewish people can go back. And then comes another fella whose name you all know, a guy by the name of Adolf Hitler, and World War II occurs. Now we're in the 1940s. And the horrors that he unleashed upon the world, and specifically upon the Jewish people, led to some considerations that bring us closer to our modern day. World War II got us to a point, after 3 decades of animosity and tension in Palestine, where there were few Jews living, Palestinians living, the Holocaust fueled the determination of Jewish people and the world, because they were feeling guilty about what happened to Jewish people, that they should have a homeland and it should be back where it was associated with them in the scripture. And so in 1947, a resolution in the United Nations cleared the way for the establishment of Israel to become a political reality, not just people, but a geographical expression, that Israel would become an actual nation. You'd think that that would allow for peace, but it did not. Because what that unleashed upon the world was something that has become known as the Nakba. Nakba is an Arabic word which means the catastrophe. Because in 1947, when it was declared that Israel could become a nation, in 1948, Israeli forces began to remove the people who lived on that land, the Palestinian people who lived there. And many people say, well, that's not bad. But when you think about the fact that more than 700,000 Palestinian Arabs were removed from their homes and forced to flee, many of them fled into Syria and Lebanon. Some of them tried to go into Egypt. Most of them gathered along the coastline where the Gaza Strip is. They had to flee their homes. And upon fleeing their homes, many of the people who fled from Palestine in 1948 could trace their roots to that land for over 1,000 years. And they were being replaced by people who had not been there for 1,000 years, coming from Russia, coming from Spain, coming from Germany. These were the Jewish migrants who came back into the land after the declaration in 1947. Since that time, that piece of property has become a land of constant conflict. And we're talking about a legacy of conflict that features war after war, skirmish after skirmish. I mean, I don't have time to name them all, but there was the Suez Crisis debacle in 56, the 6-Day War in 1967, then the Yom Kippur War, where a couple of countries came to beat up on Israel, and then the Intifadas, where people just began to pick up rocks and throw at tanks. The Lebanese wars, there were 2 of them that were started. I mean, conflict after conflict after conflict, unending since 1948 in that land. And now today, since October the 23rd, we are looking at the war with Hamas. Hamas is an Islamic, how shall we say it, organization that seeks the destruction of Israel and the reestablishment of Palestine for Palestinians. And since October of 2023, when Hamas forces infiltrated a portion of Israel and killed 1,400 plus individuals in an act of absolute horror, there have been over 46,000 people killed in a year. Now, you think about it, folks. In the Vietnam War, I think it was only, 70,000 or something like that? In a year, 46,000 people have been killed. Over 46,000 people have been killed. But this is where it becomes really blood-curdling. Over 44,000 of those individuals are Palestinians, and 1,700 of them have been Israelis. Think about that imbalance, and that'll bring us to where we are today. So we know that there's conflict. We recognize that this land has been, what we tried to share today is that it has passed through the hands of many different owners and tenants over the thousands of years that it has been in existence. Many people are saying, well, who does it actually belong to? And that brings us now to the real relevant questions that we need to ask about this landmass. Number one, we need to ask, is peace possible? Can you have a 2-state solution in that little narrow strip of land called Palestine that we now call Israel? Can you have an Israeli state and a Palestinian state side by side? Or can people live together in peace? And then the other relevant question that we really have to ask is, what role does the Bible play in this? There are many people who believe that the questions concerning this landmass have to be based upon statements made in the Bible. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. They shall prosper that love thee. Many Christians use that text to say that you've got to seek the peace of Jerusalem, which means you got to seek the peace of Israel. There are other Bible portions where it says, I will bless those who bless you. Many people say, if you want to be blessed, you have to support Israel because they own it. And that comes to another relevant question. As Christians, are we duty bound to support Israel? These are questions that we have to talk about. And why? When you think about the fact that most Black people grew up going to a church that has some biblical Israeli place name like Ebenezer or Mount Hebron or something like that. Should Christians support Israel? And last but not least, are the Jewish people today still God's chosen people? Many people ask these questions. And these are questions that need answers. And of course, most of us don't have the tools to have those answers. But fortunately for us, we come together with a group of individuals who have the brightest minds and the deepest hearts and the most articulate of tongues, who can come up with answers for almost anything, the members of the Upset podcast. And so we turn this back over to them. And I ask them, what say ye one? What say ye all?
Every time you say that, Tally, I'm like, who's he talking about?
So funny to me.
Ooh, well, let me just say before we start answering those questions.
Have you noticed how much, I don't know if any of the others have noticed, how much Pat and GP are starting to look alike these days?
They look alike. They do.
Have you noticed that? We had a little swap there. Hi, GP.
I am not he, nor will I ever be.
Welcome, GP.
Yes.
Glad to be here.
Yeah.
You like Jesus just appear in the crowd all of a sudden.
And if I disappear, don't question it. Just go with the flow.
But no, I was going to say too, Tally, every time I hear you break down something, I always say, I wish Tally was like my history teacher. I probably would have enjoyed history much better than I did in high school, because
history is not the past. It's living. And when you look at what has happened in that landmass, for people to come away with simple solutions without asking the complex questions, it is unfair to any of us, really.
Right. Yeah. I appreciate you going back far enough so we can understand how we got here. And so now we're posed with those questions. Charles, I see you moving your hands. Yeah.
No, just moving my hands.
But let me just ask all of you, do you still regard Jews as God's chosen people? And there was silence for the space of half an hour.
I think the Bible states that they still are. I mean, even though we know that they've had all certain kind of kings, whether they've been holy or unholy, but I mean, God's plan for his people still doesn't change, right? Doesn't change. Oh, I feel like you set me up, but anyway.
When you ask that question, when you say chosen people, what does that come with? Chosen how? Why? Why are they chosen?
Well, I guess when you
speak better than other people.
Favored. I mean, let me ask you differently. Many people perceive that God has a plan for Israel as a geographical expression, that God has a plan for people because they are his chosen people. People look at the book of at the writings of Paul, where he says, but Israel will still be gathered in, and people look at the book of Revelations, where it talks about gathering people together at Armageddon, and they feel that God has a purpose for this landmass. Therefore, it must be supported by Christians.
I struggle with that. I don't know if I can fully answer your initial question. I will say that being in support of anyone shouldn't come with blind loyalty. We should have the capacity to question motives, question decisions, because I mean, I support you, Tally, and I think you're a brilliant person, and you've been great to me. But if you were to, do something heinous to Marlena, I would have to speak up and say, this
Thank
is
you,
not
Migs. Thank you.
this is not right. Even though I support you, those numbers are staggering, right? 44,000
Yeah.
in a year.
Yeah.
And to justify that, to say that, I've heard people minimize it and say it's not that bad, right? I've heard people in support of, and I think that is dangerous to say that suffering or dropping bombs on hospitals, on schools for the sake of hunting down Hamas is very dangerous, because we have essentially put a higher value on one life over the other, and I don't think that is the message that God has put on us to carry to the world. Come and be saved, but understand that these people are first class and y'all are economy. I don't think that's the gospel right there. And so I don't think, should we support them? I'm still wrestling with that question, but even if I were to support in that way, I would still feel uncomfortable with what's happening, what's transpiring in Gaza.
But also, I mean, when we look at I agree with you, Migs, when we look at biblical stories, when the children of Israel went against God, I mean, they did not represent him well at all, and they did many destructive things, but they were still the people of God. That's where I was coming from, and not a people that, as you were stating, are superior to others, but it's the culture where the actual Jesus came from, his family, where he lived. So but it does not mean, right, that they have the right to mistreat others, and that's okay, because they are God's chosen. Because evil kings rise all the time, and when we look at the number of good kings in Israel, there were few. And so I'm like what you agreeing to what you're saying, is that if someone is working contrary to even what the word of God says, humanity, just basic humanity, then we must choose humanity over our loyalty to a war.
Well, it's according to, for example, there are people, the dispensationalists, our Christian dispensationalist brothers, believe that Jews are still God's chosen people. The late great Planet Earth and other books like that kind of present that view. But then there are others like us, Marlena, who believe that Israel has been replaced by the Christian church, that now the church is the Israel of God. And this is a struggle. I mean, people wrestle with these questions as to whether or not God has, and then there's the theological issue. Does God play favorites?
That's what I'm struggling with.
Yeah. I mean, look, if you're a Seventh-day Adventist, you actually believe that God does play favorites because he has a remnant church that he likes better than all the other churches. Does God play favorites? GP.
This is a very difficult topic for me. I am feeling really constrained to speak my mind on this. The historical perspective, Tally, was great, but we're here in 2024. Where young Palestinian babies are being targeted. Doctors Without Borders reported many times that they went over there to help, and they found that most of the children that were either killed or wounded were targeted by Israeli soldiers. Wounds to the head and to the chest. Look it up. The testimonies are there.
Yeah.
And the interviews are there. I'm talking about right now as Seventh-day Adventist Christians. Where do we stand with that reality?
That's a very good question, Chuck, because I don't remember us making any statement.
And then to be, as a nation, to be complicit.
Yeah. I
we
mean,
don't talk about that.
The bombs that are falling, many of them bear the insignia of American manufacturers and have been extended by the American government.
Bombs.
Yeah.
2,000-pound bombs.
Yeah.
And so, you talk about humanity, we have a lot of our religious and theological stuff we have to wade through to admit to our allegiance or non-allegiance to humanity. And these are indigenous people. They are treated like most colonizers have treated indigenous people in the history of mankind. These are not just people who are, walking through the desert and they're unintelligent. These are universities, hospitals, clinics, engineers, very intelligent people who are being shot down like animals.
Yeah.
Where do we stand as Christ-centered people with that reality? Regardless of your religious understanding and historical values, where do we speak up? At what time do we speak up? Yeah, I happened to come around, across in some of my research. I happened to come across a Facebook thread. There's actually a group that got together and opened up a channel or an account called Seventh-day Adventists in Support of Palestinians. First time I'd ever seen anything that had the Seventh-day Adventist name in it in support of Palestinians. Now, we struggle with, who's at fault and who's the chosen people and so forth and so on. This topic really is a 4-part show. I mean, really deep dive. Yeah. You did a magnificent job, Tali, in truncating the history of this. Amazing. I mean, I was, I sat here, I said, how is Tali going to handle this? This is a massive subject.
It is.
It's like eating an elephant, one bite at a time.
Yeah. But, I'm concerned, when you talk about our talking points, Latasha, I'm already down to number 10. If you look at the talking points, where do we go from here?
Yeah.
How do we process
main question.
All of this that's happening? And maybe I followed it too close, but when I hear the testimony of a Palestinian physician who is struggling with less than perfect conditions, no supplies, no medicines, he goes to report to the one hospital that was left standing, only to get a call when he got there that his home was bombed and his entire family was wiped out.
Wow.
That's just one of many stories. Oof.
It's tough. It's really tough. And we need to know now as Christians, where do we stand with that? Do we support Israel in that way? Do we support the Palestinians in that way? And I know Hamas comes in the middle. So, and I'm not, lessening the horrific event that happened on October 7th. It was horrific. It's terrible. To have lost the Jewish and Israeli lives, and as well as there were also some military that were lost in that number. So they weren't all civilians, but it doesn't matter. Lives were lost. Lives were lost.
One man. I'm sorry, Charlie.
Go ahead, John.
I mean, and what we all know is that what Hamas did in October of 2023 in coming and assaulting that that concert and ending up with the death of upwards of 1,200 to 1,400 people. That act of terrorism is horrendous. But one man's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter. What people forget about is that in the United States of America, this country began with acts of terrorism. The Boston Tea Party was a terroristic act. What people really forget is that in the 1940s, the terrorism was being conducted in Palestine by Jewish people. Menachem Begin was a part of a terrorist organization, and they were putting in bombs where the British were in control at that time. They were using terror to try to dislodge the British. And many of those individuals went on to become statesmen for the nation of Israel once the nation of Israel was founded, because one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. What do you say about those who say, listen, Palestine has been annexed and colonized for so long? Sure. You can look up the story of a gentleman whose name is Jad Isaac. Jad Isaac is a PhD who was arrested by the Israeli forces when he began to grow tomatoes in his yard and teach his neighbors how to do their own agricultural work in Palestine. He's Palestinian. He was arrested because what he was doing was considered to be subversive, because it was mitigating against the ability of Jewish merchants to make money by selling agricultural goods, by teaching self-determination, which is the same thing that used to happen when they would say you can't teach a slave how to read. How do you view those who say that Palestine has been colonized for so long that violence becomes an understandable tool on their part?
Yeah, that's a deep question. But even today, people say, well, there are Palestinians that live in Israel.
Oh yeah, they're Palestinians.
They live right there in Israel.
However, in the Israeli Defense Force.
Yeah, right. And however, it is to this day still a reality that a Palestinian cannot walk down a street that they are restricted from walking down. So, if you take, I don't know, you may want to buy the book. I don't know, Pally, have you heard of Ta-Nehisi Coates?
Oh yeah.
He just published a book in October called The Message.
I have it right on my stand right now.
And it chronicles his visit to the Middle East. And some of the things that he had to share in there are amazing. I've seen several interviews by him. And he said, even as he traveled around during the 2 or 3 weeks that he was there, he was stopped multiple times. Now, this is a Black man from the United States of America. He was asked by IDF soldiers every time they stopped him, what religion are you? What religion are you? And he knew that was kind of a trigger question, because if you give the wrong answer, you could end up in jail. Today, 2024, this is what they're living with in that region. And it just bothers me that we cavalierly talk about this stuff, and there are people that are really under enormous pressure to just live.
Yeah.
And I think I struggle too with this topic, because on the surface, when you hear of people, especially children, losing their lives and all of this devastation, you're like, just stop it. This is not right. It seems so like this shouldn't be the case, but yet it's not that simple, because even though I may feel strongly that this should stop, what do I do with that feeling? In some ways you feel a little powerless, because you're relying on government to make certain decisions. Granted, we can put certain pressures on government, but at the same time, we also know that this is a little bit more complex than what we see at face value. There are other things going on behind the scenes, sometimes that we are not even privy to. And so you almost feel like this isn't right. Why don't they just stop? But there's a whole nother side of it that we may not even know about.
Yeah,
so
and
it just leaves me puzzled. Like, what is the solution?
Yeah, it has enormous rippling effect.
Right.
It is affecting almost every aspect of our American society, even down to politics. Well, our most recent election, a lot hung on that.
Right. That's true.
Because you heard the question asked many times in interviews. Do you asking either candidate or anyone who is in government position in Washington, do you support what Israel is doing?
Right.
And of course, the answer is we believe that Israel has a right to defend
itself. Yeah.
A lot of folks have lost their jobs recently over those statements.
Yeah,
correct.
It's true.
Questions.
Can't even say.
In fact, there are a number of ranking veteran State Department workers that have been there for 10, 15, 20 years who have resigned. They said, we can't, we're right here in the State Department, and we, as State Department workers for years, we're not talking about summer help. We're talking about people who have dedicated their lives to the work of the State Department, resign. They said, we can't do this anymore. We can't sign off on murder.
Wow.
The question that gets at, because we can, in the comfort of our living rooms and offices, we can discuss this dispassionately or passionately even. But the question becomes, when is the last time any of us has written to our elected officials saying, express, represent me. I do not like this, or I support this. And I ask this question, I won't ask anybody to raise their hand, but when is the last time you've expressed yourself to your designated representative on this matter? And I assure you that 99% of those listening to us and those who attend our churches, not only do they not think, have they not expressed themselves, but they don't even think about it. I mean, how would you, think about this. If you came home and you had to pull your 6-year-old daughter out of the rubble of what used to be your house, how many years would it take for that hatred to abate on your part?
To your point, Tally, I from the inception, and I remember the president, U.S. president, advising, speaking to Israel, pleading with him to take a different course, considering the fact that we're just wrapping up a war that's been lingering for 20 years. And, the outcome of that has been interesting. Some would say that we've probably created more terrorists over that time than eliminated. And we see that this act of violence and this level of force very rarely creates the peace that we think it will.
Right.
You're essentially creating more terrorist groups and inciting other terrorist groups to join this fight. And I kind of stepping away from my religion just for a moment, just thinking tactically and thinking on a geopolitical side, they should have handled, in my opinion, it should have been handled, a little bit more, with a little bit more precision. If you're truly targeting Hamas, target Hamas.
Target Hamas.
Right?
Yeah.
That's not what we're seeing on our side, and of course, there are ripple effects that are happening in that region. We see their war with Iran, or their tension with Iran and Lebanon and all these other surrounding areas and these other terroristic groups, and it's what this really was supposed to be about. And so for me, just that level of violence never creates the expected outcome. In fact, I'm reminded of, I think it's Genesis 34. Jacob's daughter Dinah was raped, by that king, and we saw what that act of violence led to, right? And I remember, towards Jacob's last moments, when he's, speaking on blessings and blessing all of his sons, he speaks to that event and his displeasure in what his sons have done. And he curses one of them, or I think a couple of them, because of that, right? And I think we ought to take that in accord when we're talking about these matters, because that, that was a very critical moment in Jacob's life, and there was a question that you asked, Tally, about can these two live in peace?
Yeah, that's to me a good question.
Is it possible? Yes. Is it probable? I'm not sure. I think so much damage has been done. The trust, and then there's an extreme imbalance of power. The people that are backing Israel and the resources that it's given versus the lack of resources on the other side, there's an imbalance there that I'm not sure would facilitate peace.
Think about you can use the same points, Migs, about Black and white America.
Mm-hmm.
The violence that was done to Black people, the enslavement, the 400 years of discomforting and the stealing from Africa, and the imbalance of power. When you walk into Washington, D.C., until recently, every picture on every wall, when you walk around the city of Philadelphia or any major city, every statue that you see reflects a power structure that doesn't include you.
That's right.
Can we live together in peace?
Right.
Obviously, we try to do it every day.
Right.
Yeah, I want to say to your point, Migs, that studies were showing that Hamas was hiding among the people, right? But I think their technology, because it keeps talking about how Israel's technology was so sharp. Can't you, in your way of leading to Hamas, can't you do it in a way without destroying so many innocent people to get those whom you are running after? Is it, I mean, it's almost become that, they were just obsolete. One really cared, as long as you got the few who were, a part of October 7th, which just made it extremely devastating. I remember the cook there, what's his name, Andreas, right, who brought his group in to make sure that the Palestinians had food to eat, because they couldn't even get food and they were being destroyed. And they said the top of their cars were labeled so that people could see, that they were humanitarians. And I mean, many of their cooks were murdered. It's just a really sad thing. But I wanted to ask you this, Tally, because we as Christians know that the modern Israel, right, includes all of those through Christ Jesus, extending the Abrahamic, seed, right, through Christ. So that makes all of us Abraham's seed. So if that is the point, why are so many Christians still supporting the evils that are done?
Well, they will tell you that they, just like many white Americans will tell you, I don't support the evils that were and are done through white supremacy. But then they will elect a person who is reflective of those evils because it makes them feel safe. When it comes to, for example, I have good friends who believe that they will quote the passage of scripture that said that the promises of God are without, God will not take them back. So therefore, God is still for Israel. So I have to be for them. I mean, they will read those scriptures to you, and they sincerely believe that. And as such, when Paul says that the gifts of God and the gifts of calling are irrevocable, they feel duty bound. It makes them feel safe to support Israel. And then on the other hand, there's the fact that people who don't understand Islam perceive that Islam is satanic, not recognizing that the Quran includes the birth of Christ and that Muslims actually have more beliefs in common with Christians than Jews do. They don't understand that. They don't and so they just, it gives them comfort. People find comfort in the things they believe, and many people enter a discussion unwilling to confront their beliefs, they just want to confront you, but not their beliefs.
Yeah, I just want to say that, we could go on and discuss all the details about this, and to be fair, there are a lot of people of Jewish heritage, some who Israelis who are not in support of what Israel is doing. There have been many protests. You've seen them on the streets. You've seen them on college campuses. We've even had some college presidents be fired over their stance, on this issue. And also, to be fair, most recently, I heard an interview coming from an IDF soldier who quit, told his commanding officer, "I can't do this anymore." In a specific case he was talking about is when they went into a village and they, did the damage that they were going to do. There were still a few houses, Palestinian houses, still standing, and he was asked to burn them down. And the soldier said, "That was it for me." He says, "There's no need for us to do that." And Marlena, to your question about, them being able to find Hamas or terrorist leaders and just, deal with them without having any collateral damage. Well, Israel has one of the most sophisticated, high-tech militaries in the world. They have the ability to target accurately. But there is some intentionality.
Yeah, they want to do that.
To take out innocent human beings. When you hear terms like mow the lawn, okay, when you have politicians from this country visiting Israel and signing the bomb cases with finish the job, that's intentionality. They intend to murder. And I think what this all boils down to is like, all of this is because of evil adversary.
Yeah.
We will lose our minds trying to figure out, why would someone do that? Why would someone kill them? It is based in evil.
Yeah.
It's entrenched in us, every day. And it's something we have to live with and die with. There's a lot of evil going on in that. I just want to say that we should all, with all the headlines going through, we should all keep in our prayers those innocent families, those innocent people, and their families that have been cut down unnecessarily.
GP?
Agreed. I think this topic is so important. And like mentioned before, a lot of people minimize the gravitas of this issue.
Yeah.
And there are people in America who are extremely angry. And I want to share this development. So some of you heard about the shooting at the Adventist school in Northern California. Suspect's motivation. If you can read that, I mean, look at this. It says countermeasure involving child executions has now been imposed on the Seventh-day Adventist school in California, United States, by International Alliance. Lieutenant Glenn Litton of the Alliance carried out countermeasure in necessitated response to America's involvement with genocide and oppression of Palestinians, along with attacks toward Yemen. So this is a motivation. He was so upset at what was happening. Now, I don't know his mental status, but there are people like him who feel like taking action because of what has happened, because there's a lack of action by other people around the world. And so what do we do now about people in America who may be on the brink of taking action because of the displeasure they have with what's happening overseas? How do we address that? Our safety concerns. We're not talking about this enough, in my opinion.
I agree.
Mhm.
I agree.
Yeah, and I feel like that's, I mean, not that, in no way did we justify, taking that,
No. Yeah.
that,
Yeah,
but
and it should be noted that this man was
yeah, there was
diagnosed
something.
as mentally ill, yeah.
Right. And there are more like him. That's the sad part. I mean, a lot of times, a lot of us, because it's not affecting us directly, can, when we turn off the TV we turn it off, we don't think about it. And this is this person's attempt at bringing it to us. And we don't want that to be what has to happen in order for us to be aware of what's going on. And I mean, I like what you said, Tally, in terms of like challenging us, to write our local politicians and speak against it so that they have something to take to the next level and the next level. So there is something we can do. I wonder if we just think, like I felt powerless, like I can feel this way, but how can my voice matter in such a large scale thing that has been going on for an extended amount of time? But maybe that is what we need to do, because I do think it's important for us to develop some type of action steps for those who feel like this is wrong. Yeah, I don't know what to do. I think that was a great one that you suggested, Tally. And I don't know if we have others that we may be able to share with our audience to stand up and do something. Those who want to do something, what do you do?
Yeah, Tally, do you recall the visit that 1,000 Black Christian pastors made to Washington? They wanted a audience with the president concerning this issue, and
I don't recall.
As I recall, I should have had the story in front of me to speak accurately, but there was a uprising with the group. There was a group that came together. They were all pastors, and about 1,000 of them wanted an audience with the president to address this very issue. They got representatives of the White House, but not the president. And so, do you recall seeing or hearing that story?
I remember that there was some uprising, but I didn't remember them actually being refused to see the president, although I am not surprised at all.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's just addressing the point, but there are people who were concerned and tried to come together and tried to group together and approach the government.
But it does make a difference. I mean, the first time people went to protest slavery, the government laughed at them. And the second time, violence was used. And the third time, they said, let's negotiate. So it does make a difference. Look, I would suggest that as the Upset podcast, that we write a letter, to the representative who represents the conference, say, or get a vote from the conference executive committee that says, we as the executive committee of the Allegheny East Conference stand in opposition to supplying weapons of warfare for the destruction that we're seeing in Palestine. I mean, you don't have to take a political position. I mean, but let me tell you, I mean, I have met with White House staff more than once. These letters make a difference.
Okay.
They make a huge difference. And so, but the thing that people depend on is the silence serving as acquiescence on the part of good people like ourselves.
And out of sight, out of mind. You don't see much of what's going on. You don't hear many stories. And so you just know that there's a war, but you forget the humanity of it all, innocent people just dying. And like when you hear the story that Chuck just discussed, about the doctor, I mean, it just makes it so personal, where you see people's lives and the children and, all of that. And it hurts. It hurts. And so how can we as Christians, when God says, love your neighbor, how can we do this, and just let it pass by like everything's okay?
In concluding, from my perspective, my leading this discussion, the reason why you have terrorists is because terrorism works. Unfortunately, terrorism works. I mean, when you look in the Bible, a group of people escaped slavery and they went into another community and they terrorized that community. If you read the letters from leaders of that community to the leader of the world at that time, Pharaoh Akhenaten. They said these people are terrorizing the community. The people that they were talking about were the Israelites.
Mm.
Jerusalem became Jerusalem because David said to the person who figures a way to get into this city so we can take it over, I'll give him my daughter to marry. And that's how Joab became Joab, because he figured a way to go up through a water chute that allowed them to sneak into Jerusalem and destroy it. Now, from the Bible's perspective, those are the people of God. But if you're living in Jerusalem at that time, they were terrorists. The United States of America was established because terrorism worked. When you don't have laws and rules in your favor, you resort to violence. Now, it is not good. It is not healthy. So just decrying terrorism is not going to stop it. That's first. Secondly, what we must realize is, from a theological perspective, no better authority than Jesus. He was talking to a woman, and she was talking about the religious stuff, and Jesus made this statement. He says, "Believe me, woman, the time is coming when we won't worship God on this mountain," which was Mount Gerizim, "nor in Jerusalem." In other words, Jesus was saying, there won't be nothing sacred or holy about a geographical piece of ground when it comes to worship. So for people who believe that you got to have Jerusalem in order to have correct religion, read John chapter 4. Last but not least, the worst thing in the world is to become inactivated.
Yeah.
And it is time for us to do something. If you just lift a pen and raise your voice through writing, it is time for us to do something.
Thank you, Tally. Yeah, I think that was an excellent summary of, I want to do something. I don't know. I do want to do
As
something.
our communications director, you can, and I will sign my name to the action. I know how to spell my name. Geston. Thanks for Pierre, GP.
You knew how to sign it.
Yeah. I think that's important. I think a lot of people, like you said, have fear of repercussions and stuff like that, as we've seen have happened to others. But I do think that shouldn't deter us from doing what we know is right and speaking truth to power. So,
well said.
All right. Thank you guys for having this discussion. I am looking forward to hearing how our audience feels regarding this. So we'll be checking out your comments, and if we do put together some type of letter and open it up for others to sign, we will make sure we share it with this community so that you can sign as well. All right. Well, Tally, I look forward to your presentation tomorrow at PELC. I'm looking for.
Monday is right up on me. It felt like it was 2 or 3 days away, but now it's right here.
Yes, and of course we'll have more to share for those of us who will be at PELC this year. We'll have more to share with you next week about how it went. All right, guys. Well, thanks for joining us. We hope you have a great week, and don't forget, let's do something. Let's not sit idly by.
Amen.
All right. Oh, Charles, just in time for us to.
I'm sorry.
Charles says,
I'm sorry about the tech. We had so many power outages yesterday. I don't know if that affected you.
That wind,
we had several. And when you have a lot of computers and stuff, and suddenly the power goes out, your computers get a little wonky. So sorry about that.
It's all good.
Cute alert.
I know.
Baby in the background.
Turn out the lights. She's like,
having the lights go back there.
This is not the right color. You need this one. I love it. All right, guys. Have a great week. We'll see you next time.
Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.